Michael J. with the opinion. Today we have Heather Cox Richardson, American historian. And this show is going to be Trump, QAnon, Pizzagate, Epstein, the Russian hoax, and everything all into one, and including for the piece de resistance, the Ukrainian-Russian war. So there you go. Okay, so Heather Cox Richardson, take it away, ma'am.
So what I wanted to talk about now is the resurgence of the Jeffrey Epstein story and what it is currently doing to the Trump administration. I did not see this coming. Maybe you all did. I did not. The story is that one of the big things that motivated MAGA and Donald Trump's supporters was QAnon, of course, which was a conspiracy theory based in the idea that there was a cabal of elites in the United States primarily, but they had ties around the world, that were preying on children. They were cannibals, among other things, but they were also sexually abusing and sexually trafficking children. And that cabal in QAnon was supposed to include Democratic politicians. And this is how we got Pizzagate, with the idea that Hillary Clinton had a sex ring under Comet Pizza in Washington, D.C., when Comet Pizza didn't even have a basement. Democratic politicians, business people, Hollywood movie stars, and another group, and I can't remember what they.
Okay, let me put a little twist on this with a cherry on top, whipped cream, and some dark chocolate shavings just to tempt the palate. So, QAnon, from my perspective for a long time since its inception, was and is a Russian propaganda operation. And to give you a little insight, the guy that has the Russian template to influence people is a guy by the name of Vladimir Putin. So the demographics, there was a think tank, I used to have the research on it, and I can't find it. Think tank in the U.S. that actually made the assertion that the demographics of the manipulation being done in Russia by Putin to his people, the demographics of the people that are being influenced, is similar to the demographics of the people in the United States in the mid USA. And so it's a very simple thing to do. You take that template that worked there, it's proven, and you apply it to mid USA. And it was done very successfully. But nobody could understand that or wrap their head around it, so whenever I mentioned it, it was like wind blowing in the wind. Now, Heather Cox Richardson, that's an intellect and a historian, is finally taking a step back and saying, whoa, there's more to this than I realized, and something that's bigger than big is something I would never have thought of. So take it away, Heather.
They were. I'm sorry. Anyway, the elites in the world, and that fed into the idea that Donald Trump was leading the charge against this cabal, that he was going to protect these children from sexual abuse.
But here's the plot twist, and this is where it gets very interesting. Trump and Epstein, they're long-standing friends, over 15 years. Trump and Epstein provided the blueprint for the story. Epstein was the genius that created the blueprint for it that the Russians used. Got to give the Russians an A+ for creativity, using Trump, Epstein as a blueprint to create a story that became, the umbrella holding of it was QAnon, but Pizzagate, and a pedophile ring. Young girls for sex? Epstein and Trump. It's there, right there in front of you, been there in front of you the whole time. Back to Heather Cox Richardson now.
And many people including Simon Rosenberg, who is a Democratic strategist, believed at the time, and I have to say I thought this was true too, although I didn't give a huge amount of thought to it, that this was in part a way to defang the potential for Trump's association with Jeffrey Epstein to really turn people against him, to say, oh, he's the big person out there protecting these girls, when in fact, he had a long history of being accused of sexual assault. And both he and Jeffrey Epstein, who was a convicted sexual abuser, and was facing additional sex charges when he died in jail in 2019. They had been very open about their friendship. They had been filmed together, ogling young girls. Trump had very famously said that that Jeff was a terrific guy, and they both loved beautiful women, and many of them were on the younger side. There were many ways in which Trump seemed to be involved in ways that would not play well. And I'm not talking about the legality or anything else. I'm talking about politics here. But that didn't, to me, that in my life, that was not on my radar screen in the last election. And it turned out that a lot of MAGA voters believed that Trump would, if he were back in office, release the files surrounding Jeffrey Epstein and prove that he had not died by his own hand, that instead he had been murdered. They were very angry with the Biden administration for not producing more material about that. And they expected that Trump would do it. And of course, Attorney General Pam Bondi promised to do so as soon as she got into office. Kash Patel is now the director of the FBI, and Dan Bongino, both of whom.
But here's the twist. Trump's not doing it. Well, Biden, everybody blames Biden for everything because Trump blames Biden for everything. So everybody else is going to blame Biden for everything. But here's the thing. QAnon was started October 2017. Trump became president January 2017. And this was to keep him in power for 2 consecutive terms. But it didn't happen. And that's why you had the January 6th insurrection, which was downplayed as being nothing. But that was the lever they were going to use. That was plan B and C, in case plan A, which is QAnon, didn't work. And you got to understand, QAnon came into play October 2017. Now his second term is nowhere to be found. It disappeared. Second term. Either he's going to lock it up forever for the rest of his life, or they're just going to get the second term out of him and be done with it and do the damage that they can. So Russia is the big player here. Putin's the big player. And this is why you have to question Trump's participation with Putin. You keep saying or thinking that he's being played by Putin and he's going to do something, he's not going to do something. And you just don't realize Putin and Trump have been working together for their own self-enrichment, both of them. They don't work for their people. They work for themselves. Now, to give you the first clue, Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort was the original campaign manager for Trump's 2016 campaign. And he ended up winning, and Manafort had to resign. Same with Flynn. But Trump became president January 2017. And so Manafort, this is what you don't get. And we're going to switch over to this. Manafort, So Manafort was pushing the Russian proxy, laundering money for the Russians, because I know a guy that was a big guy that was laundering the money, set up all the framework for the oligarchs and their super yachts and registrations, how to do everything. The guy I know was laundering $4 trillion a month, which was 96 billion Canadian dollars at that time, based on the exchange rates. So here you had Zelensky, actually a guy that wanted to do well, that was honest. The ambassador for Ukraine got targeted by Trump, had to get her out of the way because she was doing her job. She was doing her job quite well. But here's the thing. Where is the thing? Here's the first guy. So this is the first guy. So after the CIS was formed, Bill Clinton did a deal to disarm the nuclear weapons from Russia in 1994. This guy was the president of Ukraine, Kuchma, and Clinton did a deal. We'll provide security, and your security, providing you disarm your nuclear weapons. And they created the CIS, the Commonwealth Institute of, or Independent States, which was Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. And that's why 2014, when Crimea was invaded, Obama should have gone in, pushed Putin right out. But they didn't honor the agreement. Just like Trump didn't honor the Iran agreement with Obama. So that's why he had that problem. So Viktor Yushchenko was actually trying to get the Ukraine into, NATO, European West. But there was this other guy, Yanukovych, which was the proxy that Paul Manafort was working with. There was a proxy of Putin. This is how they control, they get these proxies. You've seen it, you just seen an election in Poland where Kristi Noem, Department of Homeland Security, is in Poland for the CPAC convention to put a Russian proxy in place. And she's promoting Trump. Russia, Trump, guys together. Don Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, throughout the area in Romania, where the sex traffickers, two brothers, were taken out of Romanian prison back to the U.S. for sex trafficking. They're trying to manipulate Romania. They've been manipulating Serbia for a long time. So this is Yanukovych was the Russian proxy for Putin. And this is the Paul Manafort connection and laundering money. This was his vehicle to make the money, him and his partner. So you know that. And the thing is, you look at the timeline, this guy was removed from the presidency in 2014, and this is when Putin invaded Crimea. Because this guy, Ukrainian oligarch, took over in 2014. Now, did he have clean hands? No. Was he a Russian puppet? Yes and no. Not really. Probably he was an oligarch for Ukraine. So he had an allegiance to Ukraine, but he was an oligarch, just like the oligarchs set up in Russia. So this was set up in Ukraine as well. So that's why they had so much corruption. And then Zelensky came into power, and the whole reason why Trump would send the Russian tank or the tank busters to Ukraine was because then Obama wouldn't. And Obama's reason for not doing it, there was too much corruption, the technology would be given to the Russians. That's why Obama didn't do it. But Trump had no problem with that. He's working both sides of the fence for his own gain. He's not working for the people of America. Never has. And so this is Paul Manafort, got a pardon by Trump, same as the QAnon shaman and all the QAnon people that were at the insurrection got a pardon by Trump. So QAnon was don't hear about it anymore because it served its purpose, was a Russia propaganda machine. And that's as simple as I can put it to you. So when the January 6th insurrection didn't work, Biden became president. Well, that's why Putin had to invade Ukraine to get Trump back in. Everything to manipulate to get Trump back into power because they hadn't finished their job. Now that's why you're seeing the second term of Trump very, very different from the first term because he spent the time in between terms speaking to Putin. Even Elon Musk was witness to the conversations with Putin to a certain degree. So that's why on February 24, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Started the largest and deadliest war in Europe since World War II. And everybody is turning a blind eye to it. Get caught up in the money game. Spending our money, spending our money. That's being used so that you let democracy collapse instead of supporting democracy in a free world, a real, true free world. So we'll go back to Heather Cox Richardson here.
Were MAGA influencers insisted that there was this great conspiracy to cover up what had happened to Epstein and the Epstein files because because the cover-up was protecting Democratic politicians. So as soon as they got into office, if you remember in February, Pam Bondi actually said on the Fox News channel, yeah, client's Epstein list is on my desk right now. And, they promised that they were going to produce this information. Well, last Friday, I think it was, might have been Monday. I don't know. I'm never good at dates like that. The Department of Justice under Pam Bondi it released this memo that said, we've looked at all the material. We're not going to release any of it because it shows the sexual abuse of children. And we know now that Epstein killed himself, died by suicide. And here's a video from nearby his cell. By the way, it appears there was another camera by his cell that didn't work at the time. I am not really as up on the Epstein thing as I should be. I'm interested in the larger political story, and I just didn't follow the twists and turns of that whole thing as well as I probably should have. Anyway, they released this thing, and MAGA goes ballistic, just ballistic, and says, what are you talking about? You're not going to release this. You freaking promised us. And after that, on Saturday night, Trump released this really off-the-wall, really long Truth Social post in which he basically said, cut it out. Epstein doesn't matter anymore. Move on. In any case, the client list, the whole Epstein case was written by Democrats, and they're all out to get me, and you got to stop talking about this. Well, that just threw fuel in the fire. And then on Monday, yesterday,
Especially when it was written by the Russians in order to influence the American people to get Trump into power so that the Russians and Trump can do their thing, self-enrich at the expense of the American people and the free world. There you go, folks. Solved. Now you know what happened.
The administration put a ton of pressure on influencers to stop talking about the Epstein case, and it seemed like that might happen. And then today, because some of them sort of backed off, and then today it turned out that the film that they released is missing almost 3 minutes in it, which, again, I just can't imagine thinking in this day and age that you could pull something like that off. Apparently they thought they could, but now people have discovered that there is this missing time. I have no idea how one would do that, but they have discovered this. So now MAGA is on fire. And this, I think, is really interesting. My take on it is that this is just the final straw. That is, for all that people, and you've heard me say this a million times, for all that people talk about Trump having this really solid MAGA base, and there are certainly those people who are utterly committed to him, they are deeply divided amongst themselves, deeply divided. And if you think about it, there's a wonderful piece today by David Gilbert of Wired. Wired is very good on politics, in which he goes through how MAGA influencers have fallen away from Trump. So he lost Tucker Carlson over bombing Iran. He lost Joe Rogan over his ICE raids that are throwing people in prison who've never had a criminal charge, let alone a criminal conviction.
You also should know about ICE and the big bill it just went through. And the big bill had a huge amount of money to be used strictly for ICE as a paramilitary arm of Trump's. This is what you got to realize. That big bill had a lot of things that people were not aware of, but ICE had a huge increase in their budget. And during the first term, Trump used ICE as a private paramilitary organization, and now it's on steroids in this version in Trump too.
Rogan's upset about that. Laura Loomer was upset about him taking the plane. Remember that, which seems a million years ago, but it wasn't, taking the plane that somebody gave him. Ben Shapiro turned against him over tariffs. Elon Musk launched a war against him over the budget reconciliation bill. All of those things were places where, in order to take a stand against Trump, those MAGA influencers had then to side with Democrats. So even though they didn't like it, they took stands against it, it really didn't coalesce into an anti-Trump movement. This Epstein thing is homegrown. It's a MAGA thing. The Democrats were 100% not out in front of on this at all. This fear has been created by MAGA, and it looks to me, again, I will not predict the future, but it looks to me very, very different than the other sorts of off-ramps that have been offered to MAGAs that they wouldn't take because they didn't want to side with libs, right? This one is theirs, and it's not dying down. It's actually increasing. It's getting more and more fervent, to the point that today, House Speaker Mike Johnson, who has been attached, pretty much surgically attached to Trump all along, took the opposite side, said that the administration should release the Epstein files. That's a really big deal. And it's a really big deal as the podcasters, what they call the manosphere podcasters, are just pounding on Trump. They are pounding on him. Because they think that he has betrayed them, and they're making fun of him. You never want him to, if you're trying.
They think he betrayed them? What an amazing turn of events. This is kind of like a Shakespearean Machiavellian twist. Unbelievable that this could be the undoing, which, should have happened. Should never got a second chance. The mistake was, after the January 6th insurrection, Trump not being jailed. Never give him a second chance. And a perfect example of that is the guy in Brazil. Guy in Brazil tried to do the same thing, only he went to jail. Now they got a half-decent form of government in comparison. The comparables are all there. You just have to recognize the signs. Look up and see the signs. And I was going to show a few other things, but and here's why it's so dangerous. These insurrectionists being let out, and like QAnon, this guy here, the shaman, the guy that had the spear and the hats, and this is what he says. He got a pardon. And this is what he said after the Trump pardon. He will buy some, what more can I say? The spear-wielding, bare-chested January 6th rioter known as the QAnon shaman has been pardoned by Donald Trump, and everybody else in that insurrection has been pardoned by Trump. And what's he going to do? He's going to buy guns in order to celebrate his freedom. This is another paramilitary sect that supports Trump, and this is why he lets them out. They're sympathetic to him. They'll do his bidding. And this is why he's got them. This is why he gave them pardons. Why do you think he gave Roger Stone a pardon? Why do you think Paul Manafort ended up with a pardon? Everybody got a pass. All these criminals. And then you got the Genius Act for Bitcoin being backstopped by the U.S. dollar. And you just don't understand. Bitcoin, for a number of years, has been a great conduit for oligarchs, mobsters, criminals to launder their goods. And now the country that has the access to the biggest markets in the world, the United States, has created a Genius Act by, what do you think, after the so-called genius? The president that has gotten to where he has at this present moment by being a criminal and being a bully. And it's exhibited in his behavioral patterns. You have to understand he's a functional illiterate, bottom 28% percentile of people as far as intelligence, has no idea of cause and effect, and how that affects things. Because if he understood cause and effect in 2018, when they did tariff war with China, wiped out the soybean business that took well over a decade to cultivate for American farmers, wiped it out. Business is now with Brazil. Brazil's part of BRICS. So that's the scoop there, folks. So I'm not going to go any more into it. I've explained enough. Questions, comments? Throw in the comments section. Try to act with a certain civility, decorum, if you can. Do the best you can anyways. Sending love and peace to everyone. Take care. Thanks for watching. Ciao for now.